Do you think therapy might be helpful for you, but you're basically afraid to go? I get this comment a lot. I hear from people that they're afraid to start therapy, and I do understand this. So, today I'm going to talk about some of the really common reasons that people are afraid, and most of them drill down to one or two root issues. And then I also want to talk about the antidote to these issues, which I think will help you make a more realistic decision about whether therapy can help you. If you're new to my channel, my name is Barbara Heffernan, and I was a psychotherapist for almost 20 years. So I'll be addressing this issue both from the point of view of a therapist, understanding the fears that clients have when they first come to see me, as well as from a personal point of view, since I've also been to therapy. And if you're new to my channel and you do like this video, please do subscribe to my channel. I weave together therapy techniques, coaching techniques, some Buddhist philosophy, some other wisdom traditions to help people around the world live more joyful lives. All right, let's get started. So I've come up with a list of 7 common reasons that people are afraid to go to therapy. And if you feel one of these, comment below, let us know. And if you're afraid to go to therapy for a different reason, please comment below as well, because I would be curious and it might be helpful for others. So one of the most common reasons I hear why people are afraid to go to therapy is that they're afraid to open up to a stranger. Now, this fear makes sense. Therapy is sort of a weird beast, right? You pay this person and you go and you tell them things that maybe you've told nobody before in your life, and that's uncomfortable. There's no denying that that is uncomfortable if you've never done it before. But that is the process, and the process does work for many people. So let's put that up there as one of them. Afraid to open up to a stranger. And I'm going to circle back because many of these have a very common theme. Number 2 most common reason that I hear is that people are afraid to bring up the events and the feelings that really trouble them. They don't want to revisit it. They don't want to almost indulge in those negative feelings and negative events. And these may be things that you've been avoiding for a long time. But obviously, if avoiding really worked, you probably wouldn't be watching this video, right? And I've talked in many of my other videos how avoidance eventually makes things worse. So yes, unfortunately with therapy, going to some of that really difficult stuff is necessary. Now, the third reason I'll mention, although the rest of these aren't necessarily ranked, but people are afraid they'll cry. And that was always an interesting one to me because it's not a fear I would have. I guess I've never really seen crying as like a weakness. For me, it's just sort of my heart, opens up and I cry, whether it's hearing something that another person is sharing or watching a movie or watching a commercial, I can cry. So that's never really worried me, but I know a lot of people have that fear. And I've had clients who in the therapy room with me will feel like they're going to start to cry and they get so anxious they have to leave the room. So that's sort of something that you can actually work on in therapy because it's not a problem to cry. It actually can be a healthy sign. However, that fear of crying can keep people from going to therapy. Now, the fourth one I'll mention, being afraid of change. And this is one I really related to. When I was in a very difficult period in my kind of late 20s, I did finally go to therapy, but I was terrified that I would have to change, that if I actually talked about how unhappy I was with certain situations in my life, I'd have to change them. Now, when I look back on that, I think like that makes no sense. I was unhappy with those situations, so I should want to change them. But our minds don't always make logical sense, right? So being afraid of change can keep people from getting the help they need. Now, a counter to that, which I will list as the 5th reason, is people are afraid it's not going to help. So it's almost the opposite, right? It's like a fear of I'm going to go to therapy and then it's not going to help. And of course, the logical piece would be, well, it has helped many people. And if I'm in therapy and it's not helping, I can change therapists. I can find somebody who uses different techniques, has a different personality, or has different specialties, right? So that's really important. And we can come back to that towards the end of this video. So the 6th reason I'll mention is that it can be hard to admit that something's actually wrong. I think that's also something that held me back in my late 20s. I kind of didn't really want to admit that I had made some really bad choices. And I didn't really understand why I'd made such bad choices, but I knew they were bad, but I didn't really want to admit how bad they were. So admitting that something is wrong can be very challenging. And like, what more obvious way of admitting something's wrong, right, than going to therapy? And then the seventh reason I'm going to mention, which actually ties to a lot of these others, is fear of judgment. And this maybe actually should be the number one, because I do think people are afraid to go to a therapist and be judged. They're worried, what will the therapist think about me? What is she going to say? Is she going to diagnose me with some label I don't want to have? If I tell her the things I'm struggling with, will she kind of laugh at me or think I'm weak? Or, right, we have this whole thing going on in our head, and that is generally tied to situations in which we've been judged in our lives, right? And if we go back to the list that I just listed for you, so many of them are about fear of judgment, right? Being afraid to cry. I'm afraid I'll be judged if I cry. Being afraid to open up to a stranger. That could be because I'm afraid of being judged. So that fear of being judged can be under the rest of these, right? So I want to drill these issues down to two main issues underneath all of these. And the core of all of these issues, trust and shame. Okay? If I feel ashamed of what I've been through, or of how I feel, or of the decisions I've made, or if I feel ashamed that things from my childhood are still bothering me, I hear that from people a lot. If I feel shame, I'm going to be afraid to go to therapy and open up. And then the other key here is trust. If I haven't had trustworthy people in my life, like if the people close to me have betrayed me, made fun of me, called me weak, put me down, I'll have trust issues, and that will transfer to my attitude towards therapy. So I do want to say here that these fears about going to therapy make sense. That doesn't mean they need to keep you from doing it, but not to judge yourself for having these fears, right? Because that just compounds the problem. And if you were brought up in a way where you couldn't trust, particularly your authority figures, your main attachment figures, this is going to be hard for you. And if you were brought up in a way to feel shame about things that probably weren't your shame to carry, this could be even harder. So, first of all, these feelings make sense, and there are antidotes to counter them so you can get the help you need. So I think it's pretty obvious how the list of 7 things that I mentioned connect to shame or trust or both, but I do want to highlight one of them, that fear that therapy actually won't help. You might say, well, I have that fear, but I don't see how that's attached to trust or shame. So I just want to explain that one a little bit. If I'm afraid therapy won't work for me, when it's worked for many other people, that might end up being proof that there's something really wrong with me, right? That's how that one connects to shame. Or it could be that if therapy doesn't help, the person's not doing a good job, they don't know how to help me, then that highlights the trust issue, both trust in that therapist and then also trust in yourself. Because if you're with a therapist who isn't helping you, you can switch therapists, right? So, okay, if at any point this doesn't make sense, let me know. I do read the comments. I try to respond to many of them, so I'd love to hear your thoughts. Okay, let's talk about the antidotes here. And I looked up the word antidote before starting this video because I wanted to use it, but I also just wanted to make sure it made sense. And an antidote is a remedy for a particular poison, or it's something that counteracts or neutralizes a problem. So even though these feelings of being afraid to go to therapy make sense, right, and should be validated, they're also preventing you from getting the help that you need, and therefore we need an antidote. So, all right, so I'm using a lot of lists today, but I do know that they can also help people absorb information. So the first antidote I want to talk about is testing the water. You get to test the water with a therapist. You get to meet with the person, see how comfortable you feel, bring up a topic that's difficult, but maybe not the most difficult, see how they respond. I never actually took the step of interviewing therapists like many of them before choosing one, but I think it's a really good idea. And I know a number of my clients did that before hiring me. They'd come to me, they'd actually pay for a full session, and they'd let me know I'm seeing 2 other therapists in the next week, and then I'm going to pick whichever one I'm the most comfortable with. And I would be like, great, that's really smart. So you can interview therapists, right? And then that interview actually lasts for the first couple of sessions. So you get to test the waters. And that's the first one I'm mentioning. And it connects to the second one, which is that trust takes time. Now, hopefully with therapy, the therapist is good at developing trust, right? Hopefully they are responding to you in a way that increases your level of trust. And I'm going to talk about what that might look like or feel like in a moment. But trust doesn't happen like this. It really doesn't. It does take some time. So let yourself use the first few sessions to assess whether this is somebody you want to work with. So, number 2, trust takes time. Number 3, you can talk about all those fears. All those 7 fears that I listed, those are all reasonable things to bring up with a therapist initially. You could even start your first therapy session by saying, I'm really anxious to be here. I'm really worried about opening up. I don't know you. I don't know how this process is going to go. And that's a great way to actually do what I said for number 1, which is to test the water. Because if you bring up some of these fears and the therapist is able to tell you, like, yeah, that's pretty normal. I totally get it. We can take our time. It takes time to trust somebody, right? If the therapist validates you and reflects back and is really listening, that's a really good sign. And the therapist might also bring up, like, this can be really hard if you've had people in your life who you couldn't trust, right? So they might tie it to your past, but hopefully they do it in a way where you feel supported. And if you don't feel supported and you don't feel like you're getting an empathetic response, and number 4, you're in charge. You get to never come back to this person, right? Unless this is mandated therapy, which is a little bit of a different animal. But assuming that you are initiating this relationship, you can change therapists. You can stop going. You can tell the person this isn't working for me. You do not have to worry about hurting the person's feelings. So knowing you're in charge of this relationship, right? Like, it's a strange relationship. And sometimes, like, people would treat me like I was an authority figure. And I'd say to them, no, you're the authority here. You're the one who knows you best. And you never have to come back and see me again. Like, this is in your hands. And also, if I say something that you don't really like, or if I give a suggestion, you don't have to do it. You're in charge. And then the last thing I'd like to say is that change takes time. Knowing that things don't get cured in like 3 sessions. It's really important to know that. Developing a relationship with a therapist, learning to trust them, discussing things, coming up with ideas, trying those things out, coming back, talking about whether it worked, whether it didn't work, whether you didn't try it at all and why. All of that is part of the growth, and allowing yourself the time to change, to heal, to grow, and allowing the therapy the time that it needs. All right, there's one thing I want to come back to with regard to that question of what if it doesn't work? But before I go there, I want to say that I don't do therapy anymore. I am an affiliate of BetterHelp.com, which is an online service. And one reason I support BetterHelp actually is that it's very easy to switch therapists. Like, switching therapists can feel like a big deal, like finding somebody new, finding a new office, all of that kind of stuff. And with BetterHelp, because it's online, if the therapist isn't working for you, you can let BetterHelp know and they will switch therapists. And you also get access to reviews about the person that you're working with. So you can see what their specialties are, what other people who've worked with them have worked on, and whether it's helped or not. And BetterHelp gets this constant feedback because people are always rating their therapists. And if they have a therapist where people are changing all the time, they'll know that therapist isn't doing a good job. Like, I was in private practice. Nobody reviewed me. There was no online source to check. I didn't have like a 4.5 out of 5 that you could look at for a little bit of comfort. Like, nothing. I was isolated in my office. So I do think that BetterHelp and possibly some of the other online therapy services do offer a benefit in that way. So if you are interested in that, I do have a link below that gives you 10% off your first month. The link is in the description, and this channel does earn a small commission. And because I'm an affiliate, using my link does support this channel, and I really do appreciate that. Okay, so what if therapy is not working for you? And I am going to do a more extensive video on this topic because I get a lot of questions on this. But if overall, I'd say if you've been going to therapy for 4 months, 5 months, and you're not really feeling like you're beginning to change, it's not really helping, you haven't had a handful of like light bulb moments, particularly if it's your first time in therapy, usually there's a fair number of kind of like, ooh, ahas, right? So you might need a different therapist who specializes in the particular issue that is kind of core underneath most of the struggles in your life. So I just wanted to say that. And I know it's hard to invest time and energy into a relationship and then feel like it isn't working for you. I do understand that. But going to see somebody who specializes in a particular issue can be super, super helpful. All right. As usual, let me know what you think about this video in the comments. If you did like it, please do give it a like. That's super supportive of the channel. I appreciate your being here, and I'll see you next week.